You ever have one of those mornings where the world feels small, and yours a mug with last night's coffee, a radio whispering old country, and a project in the driveway that's more therapy than hobby? That was me the morning my life got loud. I was under the hood of a 60-pound scrap of metal I'd nursed back into life, wiping grease off my hands and thinking about nothing important when a girl I barely knew walked up, smiled like she owned the sun, and took the only thing I'd sworn not to let go of, my restored green ATV. She didn't ask, she didn't apologize, she just hopped on like it was a borrowed bike and pulled away with her phone already recording. It felt like someone had pulled a curtain back on the quiet part of town and showed me the mess hiding behind it. My name's Ryan. I live on a street that pretends to be sleepy but has pockets of petty power rules about mailbox height, rules about where you can park your truck, rules written by people who like the sound of their own signatures. Across the cul-de-sac lives Evelyn Brooks, who runs the homeowner association like it's a boutique court. She's polished, contagious with false calm, and she's got people who do the heavy lifting for her two guys, Dennis and Marco, the kind of men who enjoy the look of authority more than the responsibility. They smile with teeth and act with elbows. Evelyn's family has always had money. That gives them a certain habit of assuming consequences are for other people. When Tori Brooks, Evelyn's niece, 20-something with a chipped manicure and a following on the kind of app where attention is currency, rode off with my ATV, she wasn't taking just a machine. She was taking a symbol, the thing I'd poured weekends into, the stubborn fix-it pride that kept me from wrecking my days on screens. I chased at a distance because I'd been raised not to be reckless, because the idea of sprinting after a stranger on a busy street felt like something out of a movie. I called the police, and I followed the little blue dot on my phone that told me where my property was headed. People cheered in the background of her video as if any theft that glinted on a screen deserved applause. That's the first act of theft, the hum of social media, the immediate sting. But what turned a stupid, audacious grab into a story that ate 6 weeks of my life was what we found when the dust settled. The ATV wound up at a lot 2 towns over, a fenced yard with a sign for a towing service. Someone from that yard called Evelyn's number when I started asking questions. That call, the way it slid into place, sounded practiced. Pam, my partner, who's half hacker, half comm, dug into trail data, pulled up marketplace listings, and found a pattern. Cars, lawn tractors, and small engines showing up for compliance pickup, a phrase that smells like legitimacy, but here meant a ransom. You could get your property back for a fee. You could get a letter saying you violated community rules. You could get a threatening voicemail telling you to pay up or the cost would double. And always, the pickup route passed through properties linked to the HOA board. That's the inciting conflict in Act 2. Small-time thievery blossoming into organized shakedown. It had motive control. Evelyn and her circle had decided the neighborhood was a resource, and the rules were their tool. They'd weaponized petty regulations and turned them into a business model. Scare, seize, extort. For folks who couldn't fight back easily, single parents, older couples on fixed incomes, it worked. For me, it was personal because I'd put physical labor and memories into that ATV, and because I believed, stubbornly, that your neighbor shouldn't be a predator. We planned a sting because sometimes the law needs eyes to see a pattern. Pam set up a bait vehicle that looked beat up and uninteresting, the perfect kind of thing a predatory towing ring would nab without thinking twice. We looped in a detective named Morales, good at paperwork, better at patience, and we layered cameras like an onion. I sat in my driveway as the sun dropped, pretending to watch the gas gauge, while Pam kept the feed hot on a tablet. We wanted them to take the bait, to reveal themselves. It felt dangerous and stupid in equal measure, and I slept like a man who finally decided to stop pretending fear made him noble. The bait worked. Dennis and Marco showed up in a flatbed that smelled like old metal and colder intentions. They moved like men who had rehearsed how to look casual while committing a misdemeanor. Dennis, the bigger one, shoved me when I stepped toward the truck, a shove that came with a smile, a little flourish of entitled menace. "You move, you get a ticket," he said, as if that settled it. I didn't move. I talked. Pam's voice in my ear was low and dry. The detective's headlights cut the dark like a promise. When the cuffs went on and Evelyn's phone lit up with missed calls, the whole neighborhood held its breath like the world was deciding between 2 very different stories about who gets to tell the truth. There's a line in my head I keep returning to, Power hides behind patience. Evelyn's patience had let them practice this for months, edging neighbors into paying rather than fighting, making shame do the work of a court. The climax arrests made over the whir of a camera that caught everything on a live stream was satisfying in the way of a rattle finally stopping. Dennis and Marco swore and tried the rehearsed lines people use when they're cornered: threats, promises, excuses. Evelyn, when the detective knocked on her door, tried to be surprised in a way that suggested she'd been practicing surprise for years. The SD card in her purse was small and ordinary, but inside it were names, dates, and recorded calls that mapped the racket. That little card was a ledger of greed. But the story didn't end with cuffs. That would have been neat, and life is rarely neat. There was tampering evidence that disappeared, a phone that went blank, a neighbor who suddenly couldn't recall conversations they'd sworn about under oath. And then there was the community fallout. Some people wanted a clean break, new board, new rules, a vote to remove Evelyn and her allies. Others wanted to protect the status quo because the status quo had protected them in small ways, or because fear of retaliation doesn't flip off like a light switch. Our neighborhood meetings turned into town halls, hot with argument and the tired, loud honesty of people who finally understood what they were fighting for. I watched folks who'd never spoken up take the mic, their voices rough at first, and then steadier. We voted. We changed bylaws. We demanded transparency where secrecy had once been the currency. And there were quieter things. I fixed the ATV with Pam on a Sunday, tools between us and a playlist from my teenage years, making the air feel less like a courtroom and more like a garage. We put a sticker on the fender because symbols still matter, a small, stupid thing that felt like a flag. I also learned something about myself, that the line between being a decent neighbor and being a pushover is often a single decision away. I learned to document, to keep receipts and screenshots and a logbook. Small paperwork turned out to be a surprisingly good defense. The last act isn't a tidy wrap. Evelyn's charges moved forward, but there were appeals and countersuits and the kind of paperwork that makes you forget what the whole fight was supposed to be about. People whispered about who would run next, about whether outsiders would swoop in with better forms and worse intentions. Some friendships frayed, old loyalties tend to do that when money and power get mixed in, and a few of the people I'd waved hello to for 10 years stopped returning messages. But the street itself felt different, less gilded, less willing to let quiet tyranny sit on the porch like a favored dog. We had new leaders who actually listened, and for the first time in a long time, the association meetings had agendas with open forum and public records in bold. I want to tell you what it felt like to stand in that driveway the night we caught them, the air electric, the flatbed lights making everyone look 2 steps uglier, my hands still smelling of grease and victory. It felt like watching a pulley lift a heavy crate off your chest. It felt like watching someone you once thought ordinary reveal teeth. But I also want to tell you that justice is messy, and sometimes the satisfying part of a story is what comes after the shout, the slow organizing, the paperwork, the awkward conversations at potlucks when neighbors test each other for forgiveness. If there's a moral here, it's not that drama makes for a good story, it does, but that community is a practice. You practice accountability, you practice kindness, you practice saying no when someone tries to take what's not theirs. And sometimes you learn that banning unnamed authority from your life requires named action, documented calls, video, witnesses willing to speak, and a neighborhood willing to turn from passive to present. So what do you think? Was Evelyn just a product of a system that rewards quiet corruption, or was she something darker, someone who chose to take advantage? Did we do the right thing by pushing hard, or did we turn something fragile into rubble? Drop a comment with your take. Tell me about a time your neighborhood surprised you, good or bad. If you've dealt with something like this, say how you handled it. Share, subscribe if you want more stories that dig into the messy parts of small town life. And tell your neighbors you're watching. Sometimes that alone changes the game.